You've got a lot to do. Wouldn't it be nice to have a little less on your mind? Eide Bailly can take the pressure off your day-to-day accounting, taxes, data issues, and other business needs. What inspires you inspires us.
This is the Art of Dental Finance and Management podcast, brought to you by Art Wiederman, CPA with Eide Bailly. Whether it's taxes and investing or planning wisely, Art is the expert to make your dental practice profitable. At Eide Bailly, what inspires you inspires us. We provide a suite of accounting and advisory services dedicated to the total care of your practice. Visit our website to access our tools and resources tailored for dentists, eidebailly.com/dentist. That's EIDEBAILLY.com/dentist. This podcast is distributed with the understanding that Art Wiederman, CPA, and Eide Bailly, LLP are not rendering legal, accounting, or other professional advice. Listeners should consult with their business advisors before acting on any of the information or opinions shared. If you have questions and or feedback, make sure to email Art over at awiederman@eidebailly.com. That's AWIEDERMAN @EIDEBAILLY.com. You can also give Art a call at 657-279-3243. Without further delay, here's your host, Dental CPA Art Wiederman.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Dental Finance and Management with Art Wiederman, CPA. I'm your host, Art Wiederman. I was going to say another scintillating edition. So this will be scintillating because I just mentioned that it's going to be scintillating, folks. And today's topic, I think, is very, very relevant to a lot of dentists. Now, we talk about taxes and we talk about metrics and we talk about insurance and investing. But one of the things we also talk about on this program is transitions. And in transitions, there's different ways you can transition your practice. Like I'm a dental practice broker, and if you were a single dental practice doing $1 million, you could hire me or another broker or do it on your own and sell to another individual dentist. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is, and this is becoming more and more prevalent in dentistry, is to sell to larger groups. Now, many of you think of the larger groups as Heartland and Pacific Dental and Aspen and those groups, but there are many, many really good quality, smaller group practices than those. I think they all own somewhere close to, if not over 1,000 practices. Our guest today is the CEO of one of these high quality group practices. His name is David Lohmann. He is the CEO of Apex Dental Partners, and they own 27 practices in Colorado, Oklahoma, and primarily Texas. And what we're going to talk about today, folks, is all the things you want to know. Why would you sell to a group practice? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? What can you expect? How is it valued? So we're going to get to all that with David, who is a really, really smart guy. And he'll have some really good information. I'm very excited about what you're going to hear today. But first, let me give you some information. First of all, please go on to our partner's website, Decisions in Dentistry Magazine. That's www.decisionsindentistry.com. And they have amazing clinical content. They've been on top of everything during the pandemic. And they have over 140 continuing education classes that you can purchase for one very, very reasonable price. So go on to their website, look at their articles, their content. If you're not subscribing to their magazine, I think they have, I think they have 70 or 80,000 subscribers. Shame on you. You should be subscribing. You should subscribe to them. If you are not working with a dental CPA firm, you should be doing that. Again, shame on you, but I'm allowed to say that. And I am a founding member of the Academy of Dental CPAs, which is 24 CPA firms across the United States that represent over 10,000 dentists. And our firm, Eide Bailly, I'm a dental director at the CPA firm of Eide Bailly. That's like the Ides of March, EIDE, and then Bailey, BAILEY. We work with about 800 dentists in our firm, in our different offices. My group works with about 300 in Tustin. So if you're not working with a dental CPA, go to our website, which is www.adcpa.org. One thing I've been talking about, and this podcast will air more than likely sometime in June. Whether you have filed for forgiveness or not for your first PPP loan, the Congress changed the rules on December 27th of last year, and you can now apply for what's called the Employee Retention Tax Credit. And that's a credit that's up to $5,000 per employee if you had either a greater than 50% reduction in your practice, most likely in the second quarter of 2020, or you were subject to a government mandated shutdown. Now, that does not mean ADA shut you down, or that does not mean CDA recommended that you're shut down. This is a government mandate. Some states have them, some states don't. But if you had the 50% reduction, and a lot of our doctors did because you guys were shut down for 8 to 12 weeks, we are getting tens and in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars in employee retention tax credit for 2020. And for 2021, it's even more robust. So if you are interested in that, you can go to our YouTube page, Eide Bailly YouTube, and see the webinar that Jim Donovan and I did on March 10th. Or you can just call me at 657-279-3243 or email me at awiederman, WIEDERMAN, at eidebailly.com. If you have any interest in that. And even if you file for forgiveness, folks, you can still get a nice credit. It just depends on what you put down on your forgiveness form. And we are doing our monthly webinar series. And again, if you don't get to them live, you can see them on the YouTube page. Our next one, we've got Mark Johnson on student loans and Gary Takis on insurance dependence coming up in the next 2 months. Go to www.eidebailly.com/dental series.
Be sure to check out our new Eide Bailly podcast, Ebb and Flow, a business podcast providing inspired insight on issues and trends the middle market faces. Hear unique business stories, get answers to frequently asked and unasked questions, and understand business topics that matter to you. Available now on your favorite podcast platform.
All right, so let's get to our topic today. And again, my guest is David Lohmann. David is the CEO of Apex Dental Partners. As I mentioned earlier, Apex owns 27 practices in Texas, Oklahoma, and Colorado. Their corporate offices are in Dallas. And David is a graduate of the University of Oklahoma. And then he also went to the Kellogg School of Business for his advanced degree in business at Northwestern University, which means that he is much smarter than I will ever be. So David Lohmann, welcome to the Art of Dental Finance and Management.
It's great to be here, Art. I appreciate you having me today.
So David, we were talking before the recording. You're a huge OU fan, and I had mentioned that my partner for 33 years in my CPA practice is a young lady named Lauren Chamberlain. Lauren Chamberlain's mom, Pam. So when I told her, so I asked, she's like, who do you like? Who do you know in Oklahoma? Oh, well, Chamberlain is the one. So everybody knows Lauren. So I guess if the podcast goes well, we can get you maybe introduced or an autograph softball, maybe. What do you think?
I appreciate that. I'll definitely take you up on it.
There you go. So again, the purpose of our episode today, folks, is to give you some really good quality information about how, if you are thinking about transitioning your practice and you're thinking about looking into groups, David has a lot of great experience in this, not only from what he does with Apex, but his prior life and just knowing the industry. So we're going to get into all that today. So David, first, tell us a little bit about your journey. Where did you start off? I know you went to Oklahoma and Northwestern. How did you start your career, and how did you form Apex? And tell us a little story about that.
Yeah, you bet. So I started my career in finance, actually. So I don't come from a dental background. I'm not a dentist myself. However, my wife, Layla, is a dentist. And, a lot of what the genesis of Apex, what we've built Apex around, has entirely been based on her experience kind of going through dental school, coming out of dental school, and really those first 2 to 3 years of her career. So while she was in undergrad, she worked as a dental assistant for a wonderful, wonderful dentist and ultimately became a mentor of hers. And, really went to dental school with this private practice career in mind. The traditional name on the door, solo practitioner, really practice geared entirely around that doctor. And when she came out of dental school, the truth is that the industry was changing, the economy was in a tough place, private practice just wasn't growing at the same rate that it had historically. And I think the number is 50 of her 54 dental school classmates went to work in a non-private practice setting. So that's a number of different situations, but importantly, just non-private practice. And
when did she graduate?
2011. So coming out of kind of the recession.
And I've been hearing that too. I talked to the folks at USC and UCLA in our neighborhood, and we're hearing that too. So go ahead.
Yeah, and candidly, I think that the concept of going to work at group practice was relatively young at that time. DSOs were Heartland existed. Some of the larger ones, were certainly out there. But as an industry, a lot of young dentists just weren't familiar with what those groups were. And, I think the concept of starting her career there was initially a bit devastating. It just, rightly or wrongly, it wasn't what she envisioned. She started her career with a very large dental organization in a practice here in Dallas, and was there for 2 years. And I would tell you that over those 2 years, a couple of things kind of evolved. One was she realized how, really as a young dentist coming out of school with kind of no business background, how ill-equipped she was to kind of manage the business side of the practice. It wasn't where her strengths were. That's not the case with all dentists by any means, but it wasn't where her strengths and more importantly, it wasn't what her interest lied in. It was truly the, kind of the patient, the provision of care aspect of dentistry that interested her most. The particular group she was with, it just simply had a different model. And we'll jump into that, I think, during this podcast of, the wide array of different group models out there and how there truly is, an option for every dentist looking, for that broader support. But what we did realize is that, as I followed her early career, obviously closely, what we believed is there was a place in the industry to combine the values and culture of private practices with the resource of a much larger dental organization. So in 2014, my partner, Matt Hale, and I on the business side, my wife on the clinical side, started Apex Dental Partners. And while we have grown significantly over those 7 years, we've really stuck extremely closely to that original model. Our supported network is comprised primarily of larger, more mature practices in major metroplexes. And as you mentioned today, we support about 30 practices and 50 doctors across Texas, Oklahoma, and Colorado.
And so let's kind of get into some of the different things I want to talk to you about. So you said you own about 30 practices. So what is the most common profile of a dentist who is looking to sell to a group like yours? What are you looking at there?
This is a more difficult question than probably you think, and only because today because the industry has evolved so much. I think most people probably think the answer is it's primarily that dentist that's later in their career looking for retirement transition solution and really looking for an option to kind of sell and ultimately transition out of their practice. But I would tell you that, we as a relatively small organization in kind of the broader dentistry landscape, we have had doctors join us at truly every kind of decade of their professional career. So 30s, 40s, 50s, and even 60s and even 70s. And, I think the one thing that is consistent is that people are looking for change. People are looking for something different than, the way they're practicing currently. And we can get a little more into that. But I think for your listeners, the really exciting part of where we are in dentistry today, that the industry is changing rapidly. That's on the technology side. That's on the marketing side. It's on the, the group dentistry side. And I would tell you that more now than at any point in history, there are truly more options out there. There is a model that fits any dentist, any practice. And, would really just encourage dentists to kind of learn more. I'm not saying by any means it's a fit for everyone. But if you are looking for that support of a larger organization, I truly believe there's one out there for you.
And I know there's a lot of reasons, David, that I hear, and especially in the pandemic. I mean, I have doctors who are in their 50s and 60s and 70s who are saying, I came back to this and I got to do all this PPE and I got to wear all this and I got to dress like like I'm going into space to do dentistry, and I got to buy all this equipment, and patients are worried, and every single patient is telling me they're COVID. This is not what I signed up for. And some of them are saying, maybe it's time for me to transition out of the management part. A lot of them don't like the management part of it. So give us some reasons that you get from people. Why do they want to look to talk to you?
Yeah, you bet. And I think that the true answer is that the reasons are so personal and so different for each dentist. But I think if we look across the literally hundreds of conversations we have each year, the 50 plus doctors that are in our group, I can kind of break that down into three buckets. And I think the first is financial, whether that is kind of ultimately a retirement transition solution or kind of more wealth diversification. And as you mentioned, the pandemic kind of highlighted for the first time in maybe the last decade to business owners that there's risk in this world. We've been living in a really good business environment. And I think for a lot of not just dentists, but small business owners as a whole realize that, when you have the overwhelming majority of your wealth tied up in a single asset that is also your, kind of income source, that's a lot of financial concentration. So I would say the first bucket is financial reasons that a doctor might explore affiliating their practice with a group. I would say the second is, again, you mentioned it, but it's really the support. It's that dentist who is stressed, who is, feels like they're stretched too thin. The word is probably, or the phrase is probably overly used, but it's that work-life balance. It's that dentist that is looking to give up the administrative burden that's associated with practice ownership. And, I think that if there's one thing that groups do exceptionally well, it is providing that kind of business support, to a dentist's strong clinical background. And then I would say the third kind of bucket, and we see this primarily, I think, with younger doctors who are joining groups, is it's growth. Many of these doctors feel like they've got more that they can provide that they can offer to this industry, to their practice, that there's growth that they just haven't been able to hit. They were growing rapidly for a point in their career and have really plateaued and are looking for the support, whether that's marketing, whether that's leadership, whether it's just, a little more maybe business focus to help them take their practice to that next level. And again, the nuances within those are specific to the doctor, but those are really the three that we see most common.
And what's interesting is because, I've been working with dentists for almost 37 years, David, and I just see, when they come into our office and I'm doing their planning sessions, I talk to them about their practice. I say, well, what are you doing for marketing? Well, I'm really not doing anything. I said, okay, so let's look you up on Google. All right. Because my one of my good friends in the industry, he Gary Tech, as he talks about, he says, what's the most, what's the number one search engine out there? And the answer is Google. And then he asked, well, what's the number two search engine? And the answer is, who cares?
Exactly.
So basically, and what I'll do is I'll take the dentist and I'll go, let's Google, let's say they're in a city of Lakewood, California. Let's Google dentist Lakewood or Lakewood dentist. And it is amazing to them how they don't show up on page 1, 2, 3, or 4. And I go, if you're not in the first 2 or 3, you might as well not even be on the internet. And it's all about reviews. But I would think that working with a group on marketing, I mean, you've got marketing, I'm going to guess, down to a science, and how you do it and the different ways you do it, and then technology, and also, don't you guys offer a lot of training as far as clinical training? Because we want these dentists to be the best clinical dentists that they can be. So all these things. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is part of where we have found that a lot of dentists are hesitant to admit that they're struggling with parts of their practice. That in many cases, that doesn't show up in revenue. They're quite successful at the top line. It's that they feel, I mentioned this industry is evolving. It's really business as a whole. Marketing has become more and more complex. Some of the dentists that are later in their career are probably listening to this podcast. They started at a time where in many states, marketing your dental practice was actually illegal. There were restrictions on the size of the sign you could have, outside of your practice. And now truly, if you don't have a website, refined, kind of SEO process to drive traffic to your website, you're not driving patient reviews, right or wrong, in many cases, you're getting left behind. Someone else is attracting kind of a disproportionate share of those new patients. And, anybody listening here knows that really new patients are the lifeblood of a practice. So, beyond marketing, it comes down to a limitation on mind share. As a dentist, as a practice owner, you're expected to be an expert of everything. You're seeing patients chairside probably 8+ hours a day. And then you get to start the other half of your job. And that's, dealing with staffing issues that came out up throughout the day. It's paying bills. It's doing, working with you maybe Art on the other side and on the accounting piece. It's making sure your supplies are ordered. It's just a lot of hats that the dentists have to wear. And as you said, this industry is becoming more and more complex on the compliance side, on the regulatory side. And again, I think that's where groups have really stepped up and said, look, we can build through scale, we can build true subject matter expertise that, for most practices, single and even maybe one or two, practice groups, it's really hard to have dedicated resources that focus all day, every day on your new patient acquisition platform, your marketing platform, your benefits, your payroll, the technology side of your business, all things that I think take a back burner in many cases, but are really, really important to a practice's overall success.
And exactly. And, so when you're looking at a practice, I'm assuming from our conversations that you're at 27, you're looking at growing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What are you looking for? In other words, we've talked about why the dentist might want to come to a group, and you gave 3 buckets: the financial, the management, and the quality of life, and all those things. But what are you looking for? In other words, you're not going to buy every practice that gets in front of you, right?
That's right. And I think that, the most successful, I would say groups, but really businesses as a whole, across industries, are those that have a model, a business model that stay disciplined and stick to it. And regardless of what segment of the industry, you fall into, you look at grocery, you've got, Walmart up to Whole Foods, and they're really targeting different segments of the general population. But they stay true to that kind of business model and have each carved out, massively successful niches. And I think dentistry is absolutely the same. And again, as the group landscape in this industry has continued to grow, has continued to evolve, there's truly models out there for everybody. And what different groups are looking for varies based on that model. But let me speak to a little bit. We are primarily general dentistry focused. We have some pediatric practices in our group, but as a whole, focused on general dentistry versus some groups that are multi-specialty. We've really seen an emergence of specialty focus groups, whether that's oral surgery, ortho, or endodontic groups.
I've dealt with all of them. Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
Clients that we have specialty clients that are talking to all of those food groups, if you will.
Absolutely. But I can talk a little bit about, general dentistry broadly and kind of us specifically at Apex, what we look for. So, the first, it's just a reality of the world. Most groups look at kind of a minimum financial size. And that is groups are devoting tremendous resources to support you and your practice. And at the end of the day, it's got to be profitable. And so, I would guess that most groups from a standalone basis, so looking at your practice, operating at standalone, and I mean that versus, potentially merging practices together to create larger kind of group practices, which, we've found tremendous success in as an organization. And I think the doctors have found tremendous benefits in practicing in kind of these larger group settings. But for a lot of groups, I would guess that there's probably, at the very kind of, high level, a 900,000 of collections or a demonstrable path to near-term growth that they're looking for in a practice. Now, if you are not at that level, that does not mean there's not a group out there for you. I truly am speaking kind of in generality. So, I'd encourage you to look out there, look at your options, contact us. Even if Apex is not the right fit for you, we're not operating in your area, we are always happy to have a conversation and talk with you about, the options that we see out there. So the first is kind of size. The second I would say is kind of geographic focus. Most groups are not truly kind of national groups out there. There are some that are in, maybe 35 of 50 states, but the overwhelming majority of groups are kind of hyper regional groups, if you will. So, is a group operating in your part of the country? Are they growing in your part of the country? The kind of tangent on that is even within that, geographic region, what is their focus? Is it urban? Is it suburban? Is it more rural? So on a lot of these, it's not about whether or not your practice checks a box to be interesting to a group. It's whether or not you find a group that truly values what you have to offer. And again, I truly believe there is a model out there for every dentist today.
So if I'm a dentist out there, one of the things that I like to talk to lots of young dentists. I talk to them in dental school. I talk to clients. And you hear about groups and you hear, oh my God, well, as soon as you go to work for that group and you work back, they're going to tell you what lab to use and what supplies to use and what burrs to use and what gloves to wear. And it's all about production. I'm guessing that in a good quality group practice like yours, that the dentist has pretty much full, the full ability to give patient care the way he or she feels like they should give patient care. Talk a little bit about that and what a dentist should be looking at when, what are they going to, when they practice on their own, they do whatever they want. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now they're working with Apex or another group. What should they be? Questions they should be asking, things like that. And how do you guys do it?
Yeah, great question. And probably the most important thing that we're going to talk about today. And that is truly identifying, if you are exploring group options, the group that's right for you. So I would start with philosophy, understanding what the group's general philosophy is, both from a business perspective and really importantly to the specific question, a clinical perspective. What role does the doctor play both within the practice, within the broader organization, and I think a tangent on that to give you kind of insight into truly, what that looks like is inquire what their average doctor tenure looks like. For a doctor who's looking to kind of sell their practice as a retirement transition solution, it's 2 years and I'm out. Maybe this matters maybe this matters less. But I would tell you that the overwhelming majority of conversations we have with doctors, regardless of where they are in their career, they're looking, for a longer term partner here. They're not looking for kind of a short-term transition solution. And so I think that's really important. Next question is, what does this mean for my team? What benefits would my team pick up as being part of a larger group? How does this impact their pay? Things like that. Again, these are the people who have allowed you to be successful for years and years. It's your support staff. So make sure that you understand how joining a larger group impacts them. You mentioned it, and to me, I think what is the group's approach to clinical decisions? That's labs, that's supplies. I would say that just like this is not necessarily specific to groups. I think it's the reality of working either for somebody or with somebody as a partner. Even in private practice, a lot of private practices are going to tell you, if you're an associate doctor, what labs to use, what supplies they're going to order. And groups take different approaches. We, at Apex, take a different approach. Personally, it works for us. But I think it's important to understand what that approach is. And for us, lab supplies, those are clinical decisions, and 100% of clinical decisions stay with our doctors. So
now that doesn't mean that as a group, because one of the advantages of being in a group, David, is you've got some buying power, right? I mean, a person that owns one practice isn't, quite frankly, going to have the buying power of a group that owns 27 or 50 or 100 practices. So you might say to the doctor, doctor, we've got a good deal with this company, and as long as they have the materials and supplies that you're comfortable practicing with, yeah, you can go ahead and use them. So what is it that's going to tell you to pass on a dental practice? I mean, how many practices a year do you guys look at do you look at a lot? Do you look at a couple?
We do. And I think most groups are probably in the same bucket. So we probably evaluate 100 plus practices a year. And you can tell, by the number that, we have affiliated over the years, is that we are extremely selective. We stay disciplined to our model. Importantly, we take the approach that, when you're entering into a partnership, we think of it as a marriage. We want it to last long term. We kind of make the joke that never wise to enter into a marriage hoping to change the other person. So we spend a lot of time focused on, the person up front, making sure this is a person who, not only do they share Apex values, but do we align with how they have built their practice over the years. We look for opportunities where we truly believe we can add value, help take that burden off a doctor, help make them build upon the success that they've achieved to date, and really, take some of that weight off their shoulders. So for us, it starts with, is this a person we want to be in business with? I think probably a lot of people think it's more financially driven, but we have passed on many really, really large profitable opportunities because it wasn't a person that we thought, long-term fit the Apex culture. And I think truly you will see that among most groups out there, that they have, kind of a profile that they've been successful with, that they've had long-term successful partnerships with, and are really focused on ensuring that it's a long-term positive relationship. So for us, it's about, it starts with the person. I would say second is payer mix. Now, this may be lower on the list for certain groups, but we have a very specific model in which our practices are either entirely fee-for-service or PPO driven. So no HMO, no Medicaid. Again, there are groups out there that on the other side are entirely Medicaid-focused groups, and they do it extremely well. So it goes back to finding a group that values your payer mix, and ultimately can offer you the most value for that in terms of purchase price.
So I want to take a second, and guys, this is, again, I don't get anything for having someone like David on. This is not a promotion for Apex. This is someone who's obviously very knowledgeable, and smaller groups could be a fit for you. And it's like anything else. You need to look at the opportunity and say, is this a fit? David needs to look at it and say, is it a fit? So David, if any of our folks anywhere in the country have questions about, I'm thinking about going to a group and I've got this, you indicated you'd be happy to chat with them, right?
That's absolutely right.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead and give out your contact information, your phone number and your email, and we'll make sure we put that in the show notes. I've got your email. What's a phone number that they can reach you at if they want to call you?
Yeah, so the best way to reach us is 214-704-0720.
Okay.
And for those of you just looking for maybe a less kind of committal way to reach out, again, we understand that each person is at different places of kind of exploring transition. So I would encourage you to visit our website. It's apexdp, that's D as in dental, P as in partners.com. And you can reach our affiliations team at affiliations@apexdp.com. Again, that's a group that will be happy to have conversations with you regardless of where you are in your kind of, research period of understanding whether or not a group or Apex specifically might be the right fit for you. They're extremely knowledgeable. They talk with a lot of dentists each and every day. And we have really built this company around being a resource for dentists. Whether or not Apex is ultimately the right partner, we want to be helpful. We're excited about where this industry is going. We're excited about the opportunity that still exists here, and truly want to be value added.
No, and you're right. And I'm excited about where dentistry is going too, coming out of this pandemic. I mean, I remember in 2008, David, the dental profession came out and they were down 5, 10, 15%, but they came through it. This pandemic, they had to shut down for 8 to 12 weeks. We were very lucky that a lot of our doctors got PPP loans, which a lot of them were able to bank the money, which is kind of nice. And they got other guidance. We have the ERTC and all this stuff. And dentistry has always just been so resilient and able to, and it's all about caring and trust. And as long as doctors, you're looking at a group, if that's the way you decide to go, where, because you're probably going to want to work there. And that's one of my next questions coming up is about, do you want the doctors to work? But if this is a place you want, maybe you're 45, 50 and you want to travel, you want to not have all the headaches and worry about, oh my God, I got to do a new website and I've got HR issues. And what do I do with this one employee that's driving me crazy? You can look at this. So, I guess the next question is, let's say I have a dentist who wants to sell to a group practice, okay, you or somebody else. Are large group practices being aggressive out there in the marketplace, contacting individual practitioners? It's not like the MLS in real estate where if I want to go buy a house in Dallas, I get a broker, I look on the MLS and there's a house. It doesn't quite work that way in dentistry. So what should somebody do if they want to start exploring? How do they find you guys?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, is that, I wouldn't sit back and assume that if a doctor's or if a group is interested in your practice, that you'll hear from them. And in fact, quite the opposite in many ways. I mean, just the dynamics of dentistry make kind of outward marketing more difficult. We would never cold call a practice or just show up looking to speak with a doctor. I think we're extremely conscious that most doctors are afraid of how their staff will react if they find out they're, exploring different transition options. And we always want to be, extremely respectful of the impact of exploring, what exploring options has on a doctor. And so, we have a direct mail marketing effort. We do some digital marketing. But I would encourage all dentists to do their research. There's a number of places out there where you can, look for lists of groups active in your state. There's a lot of information out there on different groups. I would encourage you to, do as much of that work, on the front end, and then have some calls, have some meetings. That's what we do. Our job is to help, educate doctors on our model, how we're different, how Apex might be the right fit or another partner might be the right fit. So, I think every group out there is always open and excited to having those conversations, even if they're preliminary. So, and don't wait. This is probably the number one, one of the hardest parts of my job is telling a doctor that we're not going to be the right fit because they waited too long. As they wound their career down, the practice declined. It's no longer something that's a fit for our model. And, I think every group has had that conversation. So, encourage you to start at least your research early and make sure you're in the driver's seat of making the decision on when the right time is to transition your practice.
Yeah. And if you wake up one day and you can't move your right arm, that's not a good time to start calling dental groups, folks. In any negotiation, and I teach this to clients and young dentists all over the place, in any negotiation, you have to look at what your leverage is. And if you are 45 years old, healthy, you'd like to make a change, like David was saying, then you've got leverage, because if you go to Apex or another group and they make you an offer or something, you don't have to sell to them. So that's leverage. So let's talk about, first I want to talk about valuation, because the dentists are all going to want to know. Now, in Southern California, and which is the world I live in, we look at valuing single practices. We look at a couple of different factors, and I've talked about this on the show before. Anywhere between 2 and 2.5 times the true net profit after we add back depreciation and interest and amortization and my goldfish that I'm paying. I mean, all the stuff that goes through and what have you. And that's a whole nother show. We've talked to the bankers about that. And in Southern California, 75 to 95%, 95 is a little high, of the prior 12 months gross receipts, and the pandemic is not really taken into account because that's not a real period. So we look at those, and that's how we usually value. Now, I know that there's EBITDA and different ways to value practices. And David, dentist here. Oh, well, if I sell to a group, I'm going to get 12 times gross revenues. I go, yeah, well, good luck with that. Tell us when you're looking at maybe how you do it. How do you look at valuation? I mean, do you have a formula? Do you have a way you do it? How do you do it?
Yeah, so great question. And I think that historically, a lot of dentists have kind of been directed towards this percentage of revenue, percentage of collections, as you mentioned. And that is truly a great kind of, hey, if all I'm looking is at a very high level for estate planning reasons of roughly what would my practice be worth, I think that's a good place to start. I think the reality is that when you look at something based on revenue, it really ignores the nuances of the practice. And for doctors, especially who have run a business, a really well-run business that's highly profitable, basing something off revenue probably understates the value of their actual practice. And so, I love that you mentioned this multiple of net. That is a metric, I think, if you look back 20 years, that was more common in the industry. It's moved more towards, doctors at a high level looking at a percentage of revenue. But most groups are really basing it on that kind of original. We do look at EBITDA, but effectively it's the same metric as a multiple of your net. It just, EBITDA takes into account the doctor's ongoing compensation. So it's really this, it's 6 one, half dozen to another. It's just the multiple gets bigger. It's not that the value is no different, but the multiple is slightly larger if you're looking at EBITDA versus, like you said, a 2 to 2.5 times net. So for those of you on here, and Art, you may have covered this a lot, but EBITDA is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. It's sounds complicated at a really high level. It's revenue minus your practice overhead minus ongoing doctor compensation.
Right.
And, that's really what most groups and really most businesses across all industries are valued on. It's a proxy for cash flow. And, a buyer, whether it's a group, an individual buyer, or if you're listing a practice, you're doing an analysis for that buying dentist to understand what is the cash flow of this practice going forward. Can it cover my note? Can it provide the income I need as if it's a solo doctor, for my family, if it's a group, to cover the resources you're committing. And that's really how we look at valuations. But, I think it's ultimately any practice is worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. And I think there are certain dynamics of a practice that makes, whether that's location, whether it's opportunity for growth, whether it's initial size, there are nuances that value some practices over others. And I think that's really where either engaging someone like Art or, working directly with a group, if that's the route you choose to go, could really help you understand, where does your practice fall on that range?
So, yeah, and that's right. And you're going to come up with a valuation. So let's say you talk to Art Wiedermann, DDS, and you come in, you're like, I have a 6 operatory practice. I'm doing 1.3 million. It's a profitable practice. We have, philosophies that align and everything is good. You like us, we like you. And then, we go in and make the offer. So when I sell a practice, most all of the time, it's a cash deal. Now, whether it means that the buyer is coming up with 100% cash, that happens every once in a while, but most of the time they go to the banks and they will get a loan, and they may get a loan for 100%. They may get a loan. The bank might only loan 80 or 90%. And they'll put their own cash back in. There might be a small seller note. How do you guys do it? In other words, I know that some groups, David, offer equity in their groups. I know that some groups hold back money for different reasons. So if I come to you and let's say you told me, we agreed that I was going to sell my practice to Apex for $1.5 million. By the way, I want $1.7 million, but we'll talk about that later.
Great.
No, $1.5 million is a fair price. How is that going to work? Is it different in every deal? Is most of it, do you have a certain formula? Is it all cash? Do you hold back? Is there equity? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's probably different for each buyer, but I would say at a high level, you're absolutely correct. So the difference is in most of the transactions that you mentioned, and kind of where a dentist is listing their practice, selling to another dentist, and there's probably either zero or at most a pretty short-term transition, and then you're out. Those are primarily full cash at close type transactions. For most groups, they place tremendous value on that extended transition of the selling dentist. Maybe not all, but I know we certainly do. We look for a minimum of a 2 to 3 year commitment from that selling doctor. And, our deals are all structured the same. So we structure each of our affiliations as 75% of the purchase price due at close, 25% held back in the form of a seller note, that's paid out over those 2 to 3 years, depending on the commitment. We specifically don't have contingencies on that note. Some groups it's tied to your production going forward. Other groups it has different kind of almost earn-out type features where it's based on the performance of the practice after close. We specifically only have the note contingent upon you continuing to practice during that transition period. It's really designed to align incentives, ensure that there's a smooth transition of the practice, that ideally we'd have really long-term relationships with all of our dentists, but we're also aware that some dentists actually are looking for a retirement transition solution, and when you've reached that point, you've absolutely earned the right to be in control of that timing. So that's how our deals are structured. Within that seller note, we do have an option for a dentist to take a portion of that seller note in the form of equity in the management company. And this is, when dentists hear about taking equity in a group, I think there's two ways in which that comes. It's typically either kind of equity at the practice level, and the other is equity at the management company level. Both have, I think, pros and cons. And you should just really understand which one fits what you're looking for, and more importantly, that you understand the mechanics of how kind of a future value is realized in that equity.
And it's also important, and again, I don't know what your future plans are, and we're not going to get into what Apex's future plans are today, but there are groups that form and they buy a bunch of practices, and they basically merge up. In other words, they might start with 10 or 20 practices, and they acquire and they get to 50, and then they're going to go to private equity, or they're going to go to a larger group, and they're going to do that. And it's important it's important to any group you're talking to ask them, what's your end game? Because if you come and you talk to David Lohmann and his team, and you really like what they're doing, and 18 months later, and you want to work for 5 years, 18 months later, they sell to ABC Dental, and ABC Dental is, you have to throw up every morning before you go to work. I mean, that's not good. So it's appropriate to ask those questions, David, isn't it, in the interview process for a seller? A seller?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's regardless of whether you're taking equity as part of that deal or not. Obviously, it's even more important if you're taking equity. But again, we are looking for long-term relationships with every doctor, whether that's a selling doctor, whether that's a doctor who joins us, out of growth. But, it's really important that everybody's oriented around long-term plans. And, I think that you mentioned it. There's kind of two. Look, at the end of the day, regardless of any, what any business looks like or their investor group looks like, investors tend to want money back at some point. And I think that's important to realize that.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Exactly. And
I thought there's like all free money and they just do whatever they want, and it does not a big deal, So
that would be nice for sure.
That would be nice. Wouldn't it? Be easier, right?
That's right. But I think it's important to understand, if I say a group, but if even an individual comes to you and says, look, we're going to put 10 of these together and flip it and we're all going to get rich, I would have real concerns as to what the long-term kind of business model looks like in that approach. It probably dictates the way that they make decisions, that, they may be making decisions that make sense short-term financially, but, limit your long-term growth as the practicing dentist, where other groups, if they're more long-term oriented, I think that, as private equity has become more and more active in the dental industry, there's a lot of concern among dentists of what that means. To some, it reflects opportunity and excitement. To others, it's a scary kind of boogeyman. And I think the reality is understanding that really private equity is simply a financial buyer. For most practicing dentists and really any person at whether at the support level or at the practice level within an organization, bringing on a private equity buyer likely has very little impact on kind of the day-to-day operations of how you go about your day. It's truly, it's returning capital to one set of investors and replacing it with another, and really starts the clock on kind of that next phase of growth for most organizations. So I would say, look, it's certainly not in every group. It may not even be the right fit for you, but don't be afraid. Ask the questions and truly understand how kind of that long-term plan aligns with your long-term plans as a practicing dentist.
Yeah, that's really, really good advice. So I want to ask another question. So I'm counseling my client, Dr. Wiederman, who has $1 million practice. He's netting $350,000 a year. Now, folks, remember, what you net for tax purposes and on paper isn't necessarily what you really net, because I think I've mentioned, David, one of my clients years ago told me about how they have expenses in their business called bisinal expenses, Businal. I said, so what's business? It's a combination of business and personal. I said, oh, this will be interesting. Tell me about that. So the fact is, doctors, if you are running $50,000, $75,000 a year through your practice and going, stuff that may be on the cusp of being deductible, not deductible, I don't necessarily think that Apex or any other group is going to allow you to do that. So maybe you're making really $400,000 in your practice. David, what would a dentist? So you're going to go ahead and you're going to buy my practice for, I don't know, $800,000, $900,000, whatever you're going to buy my practice for. You're going to write me a check for 75%. You're going to kind of pay me the rest on a note, or maybe you're going to give me equity, whatever you're going to do. So am I going to still make that $400,000? What's the compensation formula? And doctors, it's really important that you understand that if you sell your practice, whether it be to another dentist and work back or to a group, I'm guessing they might not make as much money as they were making as an owner. Does that make sense, David?
It does, but I think there's a couple ways to look at that. Yeah, and we spend a lot of time kind of helping doctors understand that financial picture going forward. And I think, we have seen a lot of doctors go, well, I'd be better off working 3 more years. And in a spreadsheet, that's always going to be the case. That's just the way math works. What that ignores is kind of the risk. It ignores the burden. It ignores all the kind of the intangible reasons that a doctor might look to partner with a group. So, we talk to doctors a lot about, if you think about as a practice owner, the income, that $400K in your example, Art, you're really being compensated for wearing 3 hats. You are the doctor, so part of that $400,000 is what you're earning chair side effectively. Part of it is you're the manager. Even if you have an office manager, you're ultimately the manager of your practice. And the third is it's a return on the initial equity that you invested when you bought that or started that practice. So there's really 3 hats you're wearing. And by affiliating with a group, you're giving up 2 of those 3. You're giving up the equity investor hat and the manager hat. Now, they are not a third. Please don't hear that. Your income's not going to decrease by 2/3 or certainly shouldn't. But you're right. There is, part of that income that you're giving up, and that's effectively the return that the buyer looks for on the investment they're making in your practice. However, I think if you don't do the second part of this equation, and that is, what can I do with the equity that I took out of my practice? I'm sure Art and his colleagues would be happy to, help educate you on different kind of investment structures or estate planning structures, through different parts of their firm or maybe sister firms. But, I think it's really important to understand that, look, if I'm taking $1 million of cash out of my practice, that yes, the income I earn year to year in the practice is likely to go down because now I'm only, I'm only functioning as a dentist. Now I say only, it's a huge and important role within the practice, but you've really given up those other 2 hats. but what is the income I can earn by investing that million? And when I spoke earlier to one of the, reasons a doctor looks to join a group, that's both estate planning, retirement planning, but it's also younger doctors that are younger in their career are saying, look, I've got this equity I've built in my practice. I'd like to diversify it, whether that's investing in real estate, whether it's investing in, startups or small businesses, whatever's of interest to you. But it's really taking that equity out and giving it an opportunity to grow. So if you ignore kind of that passive income component or the opportunity you have to build on that million, you're really ignoring part of the equation. I think when you put that together, a lot of doctors realize that the lost income is extremely minimal up front. One more thing, Art, and then I'll let you talk. But
no, that's okay. This is
one of the beauties I think that a lot of doctors realize is that with support, with 100% of their kind of mind share focused on that operatory, they see their treatment acceptance go up. With the marketing support, they see the opportunity for production to increase through new patient flow. With staff training support and additional resources for the practice, whether that's your facility, technology, all of those things give doctors an opportunity to actually grow their practice. And I think they see that the gap that over time between what they're earning pre joining a group and post joining a group, actually becomes negligible. And we have a number of doctors who truly earn more with Apex today than they were taking out of their practice as the practice owner.
So do they get, let's say they come in and their practice is doing $1 million and what you just said happens is they're happier, the stress is gone, their case presentation is better, you give them some training, their revenue. So now this practice is not doing $1 million, it's doing $1.6 million. Do they get rewarded a share of the additional profit once they've sold to you in not only your group, but in other groups that you've seen?
Yeah, so this is, I think there's two answers to this question. So the first is if you are taking an equity component, specifically at the practice level, you would directly see some increase in the value of that equity. If you are taking it in the management company level, it's less direct, but you have to assume that if the company you've joined has enabled that growth in your practice, that they're likely growing the overall organization in a similar way. So there's an equity growth component to this that I think is really important. The second is kind of, okay, but what's the cash kind of participation, the annual cash participation in that growth? And really for doctors, they see that in twofold. So within Apex at least. Within Apex, we have a practice growth incentives that is specific to our doctors. So they share in kind of this bonus pool for year over year total practice growth. It's really designed that, some of that growth comes in hygiene. And while that's not how our doctors are directly compensated from a regular compensation formula, it's important that they're supportive and share in that upside. And the other side is you have to assume that, $1 million to $1.6 million in this example, that the overwhelming majority of that, most general dentistry practices are about 75% doctor production versus 25% hygiene production.
That is correct.
So you have picked up, your kind of compensation formula on that, $450,000 in this case. And that's something that, happy to jump into of how our, compensation formula works for doctors. But in general, I think most groups compensate their doctors on either a percentage of net production or collections, which they're effectively the same at the end of the day.
We hope.
That's right. But and so it's really, you have the opportunity to grow your income. And I would say that, look, as a group, we only make money if our doctors make money. And so incentives are 100% aligned to help you grow your practice.
Right. So a couple more things before we put a bow on this, David, and the information is great. Just folks, think about it. I use this. I've said this on this podcast for 2.5 years now. 75% of any major decision that you make in your life, whether it's getting married, buying a house, buying a building, buying a practice, selling your practice to a group, is in your gut. And if it doesn't feel right and it doesn't smell right and you're being pressured and then you shouldn't do it. But so David, let's say that we wanted to come into your group. You've got 50 doctors, and not all 50 of them have sold their practice to Apex, but some of them have, right?
That's right.
Right. So would Dr. Wiedemann have the right to pick up the phone and call Dr. Jones in Dallas, who sold his practice to Apex 3 years ago, and say, hey, Dr. Jones, I'm kind of thinking about doing this. How's this working out for you? Is this a good idea? Are these good people? Or am I going to end up in Iceland somewhere? I don't know. Do you allow that? Do you encourage that? How does that work?
Yeah, not only do we allow it, it's truly a requirement for us for affiliating doctors. We're big believers. Again, it goes back to, we want every person who joins Apex, whether that's a selling doctor, whether that's a doctor who joins us, as an addition to a practice, whether that's a dental assistant. We really talk about your time with Apex as a career, not a job. I know that's probably not, as big of a nuanced approach to many of your doctor listeners, but I'm sure many of them kind of understand the difference as they've hired staff, and where, a lot of staff today may look at it as a job rather than a career. And so it's really geared around this long-term orientation. We want doctors to be with us for the remainder of their career. And so, we think it's really important that expectations are aligned up front. No transition is 100% smooth. If a group tells you that it is, they probably haven't done enough of these. I'm sure you've seen this. But the reality is that every transition is different, and it's different because the emotions behind a practice transition, an ownership transition, is incredibly emotional for that doctor. It should be. This is your baby. You've built this, and if you're partnering with a group for to build upon that legacy, that transition is going to be an emotional one. And so we really encourage doctors, we start with 3 typically and say, here's 3. If you want more, call more. We've had doctors call 10 or 15 of our doctors. But we require that they speak with a couple of them and ask the hard question. How was the transition for you? What were the pain points? How did your staff react? Again, I think it's really important that a doctor hears that, hey, when we hit a road bump, Apex was really quick to take a partnership approach to resolve the issue and to make sure that things got back on track. And I think that is what you should look for when you're talking with dentists, is not was it perfect, because the answer is it wasn't. It won't be. It's when an issue came up, both through the transition or perhaps later in the partnership, what was the approach taken to resolve that issue? And I think the fact, we haven't talked about it, but we have almost no doctor turnover in Apex. We, for the first time,
that's pretty amazing.
It's something. It's probably the fact we are most proud of. Those doctors with the kind of transition commitment. The overwhelming majority of our doctors are well past their transition commitment, and I think it speaks to the partnership approach we take. Both on a day-to-day, but also just. How do we approach, issues, growth, making sure incentives are aligned and everybody winning in this partnership. And those are the things you should look to talk to existing doctors about. Really,
really good advice from you and I think. Let's see, we're recording on a Tuesday, so Tuesday's my good advice day. Wednesday, not so much. I shouldn't say that. But anyway, last question, and then we'll wrap it up. If a doctor wants to sell to a group and they don't want to work back, will you consider that, or is that a requirement?
We will, but the situation has to be specific. Now, there are probably groups out there that have no issue with that approach, but we find so much value, and I think truly part of the value that we ascribe to a practice in financial value in terms of purchase price is about the person. I spoke to how important that is for us in both what attracts us to a practice and in some cases scares us away from a practice is the person. And so, we will, as a whole, we look for an extended transition. We have affiliated some practices where for health reasons, for age, just I didn't start early enough, and that's absolutely not available to me. We have done those done those deals, and but ultimately we are looking for a smooth patient transition, a smooth staff transition, and the I would say more abrupt that is from a doctor, the less smooth or confident we can be. So long way of saying we will and encourage every doctor to at least have the conversation. And if that's truly something that is a must-have for you as a kind of a shorter-term transition. But as a whole, we do look for a more extended commitment.
David Lohmann of Apex Dental Partners, thank you so much for your time. One more time, why don't you give out your contact information, how folks can, if anybody in the country's got a question for David, again, David's been kind enough to, if you're in Maine, he'll answer a question. If you are in Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, and you're this is this, like all my podcasts, folks, this is a call to action. If this is what you're looking for, if it's not, then you got some information, put it in your back pocket. Maybe 3-5 years from now, you take a look at it. But if it's something that this podcast hits you right between the eyes right now and says, gee, maybe I should look at this. If you're in Oklahoma, Texas, or Colorado, give David a call. If you're anywhere else in the country and you have a question, he'll be happy to answer it. And how do we get a hold of you?
Yeah, and I would say that, look, we're actively looking to grow in those 3 states, as well as Missouri and Nebraska. And candidly, we have pursued kind of opportunistic. So great practices, great people in markets that we might not otherwise be in. We're always happy to grow around great people. So don't let that be a reason you don't reach out. So with that,
go ahead, give out your information.
Yeah,
I'm going to make a smart, what comment. Go ahead.
Okay, apexdp.com, our website, or you can reach us at affiliations@apexdp.com.
Now, you said you're thinking about Nebraska. Now, you did say you were an Oklahoma guy. So you're going to open practices in Nebraska. You're the CEO. How's that going to go over?
We've navigated the landscape in Texas, which is probably the more current rivalry. But you're absolutely right. That football rivalry may cause some problems.
It could be about. So I went to the U.S. Okay, so I'm not a USC graduate, and folks in the East, that's not South Carolina. That's University of Southern California. Go Trojans. I did not go to USC. I went to Long Beach State, but our football program was we're undefeated since 1993 when they disbanded the football program. But I went to the USC Texas game in Austin. I'd never been to Austin before. I went with 105,000 of my closest friends. I think the Texas band has about 20,000 members. I really took up like half the freaking stadium. And I have a picture of the USC marching band. There might have been 20 or 30 of them. They were sitting up like 5 miles high there. Nobody could see them and you can't hear them. So yeah, I know how Texas works. And then Matthew McConaughey is doing his hook 'em horns and the governor of Texas is on the big Jumbotron hook 'em horns. And if they'd ended that game after about 13 minutes, we would have been in really good shape, but it went an hour and that's the way it goes. But anyway, David Lohmann of Apex Dental Partners, great information, really good food for thought for today. So hang with me until I take us out of the podcast. And folks, if you want to get a hold of me at my office in Tustin, I'm at 657-279-3243. My email address is awiederman, Wiederman, at eidebailey.com. Go on to our Eide Bailey YouTube page, and we have all of our webinars that we've done for the 6 local dental societies in Southern California. Go to our log on to Eide Bailey at and like I say, all the webinars are on there, and you'll be able to find them. If you want to register for our webinars, email me. And if you're looking for great magazine, Decisions in Dentistry, great clinical content, basically www.decisionsindentistry.com. If you want a complimentary consultation with a member of the ADCPA or our firm, Eide Bailey, which is a member, go ahead and fill out the form on their website. And if you're looking for a dental CPA anywhere in the country, www.adcpa.org. So go Sooners, right?
That's right. Thanks for having me, Art.
Oh, no problem, David. Thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, I am again honored and privileged to serve the dental profession and have so for almost now 37 years. And it's great. And I get to meet great people like David Lohmann and his group and other folks that I've met along the way. And I will go back to my five-word saying I've been saying ever since March 16th of 2020. Failure is not an option, folks. And I am so happy to say that lots of my dentists have come through this pandemic, probably the worst 12 months, 14 months of your professional career. And most all of you are still standing, you're thriving, you're flourishing. A lot of my doctors really got an opportunity to do something that they've never had a chance to do, which is to sit there and think. They're not going to work. They're at home. There's only so many episodes of General Hospital one can watch, and they really put a lot of time and effort into their practices. So I would encourage you to continue to do this. Dentistry is wonderful. So with that said, folks, it's always a pleasure, always an honor. Please tell your friends about our podcast. It's growing in the thousands, and we're so honored to have you listening. With that said, this has been Art Wiederman for the Art of Dental Finance and Management with Art Wiederman. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Art of Dental Finance and Management podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode. The Art of Dental Finance and Management podcast is produced by Eide Bailly in partnership with Art Wiederman, CPA, Decisions in Dentistry Magazine, and the Academy of Dental CPAs. For audience questions and feedback, email Art Wiederman, awiederman@eidebailly.com. That's AWIEDERMAN @EIDEBAILLY.com. Or you may call Art at 657-279-3243.